What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're back at it with what if this were to happen. We have 4 teams that potentially could be tied by the end of the season within the SEC. If you saw my previous video about the Big Ten, then this is very similar. But this time, we're going to have Texas lose at least one game. Texas A&M is going to win out, lose against Texas at the end of the season. Alabama is going to win out, and Vanderbilt is going to also win out through the season. So they are going to beat Texas at least once. And we're going to see who would actually be put into the championship based on the SEC's rules on tiebreakers, and the results will shock you. The rules that I just established, we would have 4 7-1 teams. It's very surprising to me that the SEC still only does 8 conference games. There'd be 4 7-1 teams: Texas, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Alabama. Georgia would be 6-2 because they would have to lose to Texas. Missouri would also be 6-2 because they would have to lose to another team. LSU 5-3, Tennessee, so on and so forth. In this scenario, because a lot of these teams do cross over and they do play each other. But this is what the standings would be at the end of the season. There could be some changes here or there, but this is based on my picks and predictions and my estimates. First, we have to look at Vanderbilt's schedule. They'd have key wins like the Alabama. They'd have beaten Texas, LSU, and Tennessee. So they'd have beaten pretty much all the powerhouses outside of Ole Miss. They did lose to Missouri, so that is their one loss in the SEC. Next, we go on to Texas. Their notable wins are Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas A&M. They would have that. They'll have a loss against Vanderbilt. They did have a win against Michigan, but that doesn't really play into the SEC. Next is Texas A&M. Notable wins would be like Missouri, LSU. They would lose to Texas at the end of the season, but it's a very notable game. They did lose to Notre Dame, so they do have a loss on their belt, so they'll be at X2 by the end of the season. Finally, we're at Alabama. Their notable wins would be against Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU. They have that one loss already to Vanderbilt, so there is already X1 in the SEC. As of today, they would finish X1 no matter what happens if they win out, but they will have those good wins under their belt. This is the criteria for the SEC. We have a head-to-head competition among tied teams, record versus all common conference opponents among the tied teams, record against highest best placed common conference opponents in the conference standings and proceeding through the conference standings among the tied teams, cumulative conference winning percentage of all conference opponents among the tied teams, capped relative total scoring margins versus all conference opponents among the tied teams. And then if all that is tied, then they'll do a random drawing of the tied teams. Very unlikely, but that is a possibility that could happen. This chart shows the 4 teams and their similar opponents that they did play over the course of the season. The big L shows that they've lost in correlation to my predictions. Alabama already lost to Vanderbilt, so that's already an L. Vanderbilt lost to Missouri, so that's an L. And then Vanderbilt will beat Texas, and Texas will beat Texas A&M at the end of the season. So you can see there's similar opponents like Georgia with Alabama and Texas. There's Missouri in 3 of them, LSU's in 3 of them. And then Vanderbilt doesn't really share many similar opponents to Texas that are notable, because if you go farther down the line, it's not going to really matter because they have beaten them together. But this shows a good point where there are similars and there's similar losses and wins. So moving on to this chart, we have is Vanderbilt beat Texas, Texas beat Texas A&M, Texas A&M beat Missouri, and Missouri beat Vanderbilt. So that is a very complicated system that will be taken into account because you have to see who's beaten who and who's won who. Just with this chart alone, that tells us that Vanderbilt is now ahead of Texas and Alabama because Vanderbilt beat Alabama and they beat Texas. They're already ahead of them. And then the Texas beat Texas A&M. So that means Vanderbilt, just by association, has beaten Texas A&M, but then Texas A&M beat Missouri, who beat Vanderbilt. So the only real team that Vanderbilt is competing with is the only one that they're competing for is Texas or Alabama, because Texas is above Texas A&M, and Texas A&M can't be above Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt beat Texas and Alabama. So Vanderbilt automatically gets the 1 spot for the championship, and now we're only showing Alabama and Texas competing for that 2nd spot because Texas A&M will be at the bottom. Well, Texas A&M will either be at the bottom or 2nd to bottom above Alabama. Next thing is comparing the win percentages of all conference opponents they have, because the similar opponents essentially would be winning all of them anyway. So if we compare all, similar to the Big Ten, where we add up all of the winning percentages of their opponents in their conference, who would have a better record in conference? And I've added all that stuff up, and right here you can see that Texas's cumulative opponents were 29-35 overall, which is about a 45% win percentage, and Alabama's opponents, if they were to win out, where it's 35-29 based on my numbers and based on like what I predicted other teams would do throughout the conference, just based on previous history and previous performances. Because once you're at the high tier, you can pretty much see who's at the bottom and who's at the top, and there's not very much change, especially with this. There's a plus or minus 6 games from Alabama to Texas. So I think that this is pretty clear that if this scenario to play out in relative fashion, I think Alabama would bounce Texas just because they have a stronger schedule than Texas within the SEC. So then the standings would be Vanderbilt, Alabama, Texas, Texas A&M. I put Vanderbilt at 1, Alabama at number 2, and they would compete for the SEC title, even though Texas has a better overall record than Vanderbilt, as they would be 11-1, but Vanderbilt has a loss out of conference. And that's going to be it for this video. If you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. I'm going to continue making more in different conferences, as well as revisiting certain conferences based on certain aspects and try to create more crazy scenarios that create these weird tie conundrums. And the better the confusion, the better the video. So if you have any of these conundrums that you would want me to go over, please leave a comment of that similar conundrum that you've probably been mastering up in your head. And that's going to be it. Peace.